Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're going to be doing another episode of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. This will be part 174. So we're going to be having a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got quite an interesting assortment. We've got an animal coming back, quite a few primates, a couple mammals, a bird, and even an invertebrate. So we're going to be starting off with quite a famous one. You've probably eaten the product in a base before. We've got the European honeybee by Pork 21. I think it's Pork 21 or Pork 12. I'm not sure the right way around. But anyway, let's have a look at this cute little honeybee. So this is the European honeybee, also known as the Western honeybee, Apis mellifera, and is most common of the 12 or so species of honeybee found worldwide. The genus name is Apis, which is bee, and mellifera comes from honey bearing, so it's basically the honey bearing bee. So in terms of habitat, they can be found on every continent except Antarctica, and they are believed to originate in Africa or Asia and spread naturally throughout Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. But humans are responsible for spreading it to other places, including the Europeans introducing them into North America, South America, Australia, New Zealand, and Eastern Asia. And there's quite a few different subspecies described, and they're all cross-fertile, but it's kind of neither here nor there, to be honest. They're currently recognised. So the life cycle, so these are a type of eusocial insects, so they spend, basically they live in large colonies where they each have a function. So, and these colonies will actually persist year after year, and they can be considered superorganisms. So, kind of what happens is there's individual parts of the bee. So you have your queen bee, which of course she is the one making all the babies, the fertile female, has a fully made reproductive system that allows her to make all the babies in the colony. And then you have the worker bees, which are the females produced by the queen, that are basically clones, and they carry out all the tasks like going out to pollinate flowers, things like that. And then you have the drones, which are the colony's male bees, and they pretty much only exist to fertilize the new queen. So they are able to pretty much, that's their only job. Yeah, so the queen makes the babies, they're females, and the females that aren't the worker bees, so they do everything. So they start out, of course, so they will make these large colonies and create these honeycomb structures, and that's where the female or the queen will lay the eggs, and then they become pupae. And if she wants to make another queen, she'll give them a special jelly, or royal jelly as it's called, that she will give to a certain one to develop as a queen, so a full reproductive system. The rest are just kind of clones that then they'll live in there. The other worker bees will feed them, and then the first like 10 days of their lives they actually will. So what happened is that after a week they kind of seal the cell, and then they become a pupae. And then what's happened is they'll start working. They'll spend the first 10 days of their lives cleaning the hive and pollen from the other work, and taking pollen from other workers and storing it. 20th day they leave their hive, and then they spend the remaining of their life as forager, going out to find flowers and pollinate them. And they do have a stinger, which they use to defend the hives. Unlike those of bees of other in genus and the queens of their species, they are barbed. And contrary to popular belief, actually the bee doesn't always die soon after stinging. And it's based on the fact that the bee will usually die after stinging a mammal or a human, because it's just so hard for them to get out of it once they've stung us. But if they stung anything close to their size, they're fine. And we picture the queens and things like that. So in terms of behavior, they do need an internal body temperature of about 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And that can be maintained in winter. They can actually, winter clusters can be quite low though. They can forage at over a 30 degrees C temperature range because of behavioral and psychological, physiological mechanisms that they have. As their flight muscles can get their high body temperature as well, and that can help them cool down as well. So they like it about 22 to 25 degrees Celsius. That's the optimum temperature to fly around in. But there's a bit of variety there. And in terms of communication, what's really cool, honeybees are very, very good at communicating, because they are mentioned like a superorganism sometimes, so they need to be able to communicate quite well. So often when they find a flower or any food sources, they do kind of like a round dance or a waggle dance, where they kind of get to sense the smells there. They also use a lot of pheromones and things like that to communicate with each other, so chemical communication. which is quite cool. And there's some degree of variability of sociality between individuals, though, as they kind of very much social. So they develop called a toxophallaxis, which is actually pairings were measured. So they form bonds with each other, which is quite interesting. But yeah, one of the really interesting thing about these honeybees, though, is that they're the domestic type of honeybee. So humans have been collecting honey for thousands of years, and there's evidence of rock art found in France and Spain, dating to about 7,000 years ago, of people going collecting honey. And they're actually one of the few invertebrates that have been domesticated, and bees were first likely domesticated in ancient Egypt, with tomb paintings depicting beekeeping around before 2000 to 2600 BC. And Europeans brought the honeybee to America in 1622. So the bees that have been selected for Western honeybees, beekeepers select them for traits such as the ability to colony survive periods with little food, to resist cold weather, disease, increase honey productivity, reduced aggression, reduced tendency to swarm, reduced nest building, and easy pacification with smoke. These modifications have kind of made it life easier for beekeeping, and make sure they can make good money and make a good profit out of it, and get them to produce a lot of good honey. There's a bit of debate whether it's actually considered to be genuine domestication. So it's kind of a little bit of debate there. So some consider domestic, but they are a big part of our food-based economy. So typically in the US, they manage to produce $300 million to the economy in the year, and worldwide is often believed to be, for pollination, about 11 to 15 billion. So they're very important to both pollinating our crops and for honey. So it's a little bit of debate there. But yeah, there's beekeeping, the colonial insects. So, products of honeybees are things like beehives. They do pollinate flowers, a very important pollinator. So the commercial value of Western honeybees is just under $200 billion worldwide. So that's pretty much the GDP of New Zealand. So that gives you a comparison to how much they're worth. They're quite interesting. We make honey from them, which is just glucose. It's inverted sugars like fructose and glucose. And quite important because it's also quite produced quite well, and humans use it for a lot of things. We just eat it and all sorts. Beeswax and bee bread, there's bee broods, and then royal jelly is sometimes marketed to have unclaimed health benefits and things like that. But there's a lot of things that we can get from bees. But yeah, bees as a crop, because there's a big misconception. I know like a lot of companies and things have done the save the bees thing, but they mean the European honeybee, which is pretty much a domestic crop. It's been introduced to most places in the world to produce, honey and these products for us. It's not much like having a cow, so it's not a saving the world. It's not a saving endangered species kind of thing. It's saving a like a commercial crop kind of thing. But yeah, there's lots of different species of honeybees. They get lots of pesticides as well, so things like pesticides can really hurt them, like mites as well. Insecticides also deplete their populations. Also, milkweed has been found in America. There've been milkweeds in these guys. Also, their predators include things like hornets and robber flies and dragonflies. And they eat pretty much anything that's bigger than them. That's like a predator will eat them. Like spiders, even lizards like anoles and toads, bee eaters, grackles, tyrant flies, tangers, even some giant armadillos, honey badgers, skunks, raccoons, things like that. But they are quite hygienic, which is quite cool. But they are a threat. They're an invasive species. That non-native feral western honeybees can have negative impacts on the environments, as these species will displace lots of species of native bees and help promote the reproduction of invasive plants that are ignored by native pollinators. So even as we know, save the bees, but they actually do have negative impacts on our ecosystems. And so it's kind of like save the native bees, not just save the honeybees that are cute and make us honey and things. There's a lot more bees that don't make honey and just get outcompeted by these honeybees. Yeah, I think that covers it quite well. But yeah, really, really cool. Nice to see another honeybee there. Let's see. I'm pretty sure there's one that flies around. Let's see how that works out. Very cute though, aren't they? Oh, I don't think. There we are. So that's them flying. It's not too bad actually. Doesn't look like it's upside down. Not too bad. Okay, so that's the honeybee done. That was done by Pork21 or Pork12. Next up, we've got a remaster of a really old mod that I've covered a couple times already, but it's gotten some love again. We've got a really, really cool animal here. We've got the Perea David's deer. So the Perea David's deer, or Elaphurus daviensis, also known as the Malu, these guys are a species of deer that are native to the subtropical river valleys of China. So they graze mainly on grass and aquatic plants, and the only extant member of their genus, which is interesting. So in terms of the kind of name, they were first named by Western Science by 1866 by Amar David, who was a French missionary working in China. That's what's called the Perea David's deer. But during a lot of their prehistoric time, they would have lived around China and things like that, even the swamp and wetlands of southern China. So the species is sometimes known as the unofficial name, the Shibazhang, which actually means four not alike, which means none like the four. So it's not like a horse, a donkey, a cow, or a deer. It's a very interesting animal. And it reminds me, I think of it as just a Dr. Seuss animal. It just looks really cool and something that's why I like it so much. But the characteristics, so an adult Perea David's deer reaches a head to body length of about 1.9 to 2.2 meters, about 6.2 to 7.2 feet, and stands about 1.2 meters or 3.9 feet at the shoulder. Its tail is also relatively long for a deer, measuring about 50 to 66 centimeters or 20 to 26 inches when straightened, and they can weigh between 135 to 200 kilograms or 300 to 440 pounds. You can see they've got very long, slender legs and head with large eyes, very large preorbital glands there, a naked nose pad, and those pointed ears. What's really cool as well is that their branched antlers are very unique because the long tines point backwards and the main beam kind of descends straight upwards. And there may be these may be two pairs of these a year. The summer rut is the largest set and then dropped in the summer rut, and then the second set appears fully grown by January, and then fall off about a few weeks later. You can see they've got a coat that's relatively tan in the summer, but can be dull grey in winter. Long wavy guard hairs are present throughout the year, with the coat being woollier in winter. And they're semi-aquatic animals, so these guys do swim quite well, spending long periods of time in the water. Although they're predominantly a grazer, they will supplement their diet with aquatic plants. So in terms of their behavior, they do have similar reproductive physiological mechanisms to other deer living in temperate latitudes. They allow them to adapt to higher environments as well, high latitude environments. The reproductive behavior in stags different from hinds. The stags running the behavior include urine sniffing, anogenital sniffing, wallowing, and enterodorning. Communication often with the spraying of urine and preorbital gland marting is what we do with the rut. And they have a social rank between them, and often for Perea David's deer, the stag will initiate the breeding season with the rutting, and in hinds, estrus behavior includes urinating frequently, receptively allowing the stags to mount, which is pretty cool. Paternal behavior involves sniffing the calf, calling, and rubbing the face of the calf, and the hind has a typical behavior of being solitary. So in terms of their birth and lifespan, so we'll have a look at the cute little babies while we talk about that, and then we'll have a look at the girls. So this is a cute little baby. So the gestation period is about 9 months, roughly about 280 days after which a single baby is born, though sometimes there's twins. The gestation period is actually significantly longer than any other deer besides the roe deer. They also considered seasonal breeders because 3 out of 4 calves are born in April on captive Euro populations, and the breeding season is 160 days, with the mating season usually beginning in June and July. Calf weight, calculated using Robbins equations, tend to be about 11 to 13 kilograms. And the juveniles have a spotted coat, as commonly seen in most deer, and also known to develop very quickly after being born. And they reach sexual maturity at about 14 months, and an average lifespan for a Perea David's deer is about 18 years. So we know a lot of them have captivity because that's pretty much where they all live now. They are considered extinct in the wild, as we'll get into. So as experiments were conducted how captivity would affect the deer's survival rate, they actually took one large area put a few Perea deer in there in a small area with a high concentration. When found in captivity, it was best to keep them in large open areas where there's adequate space for them all. and if put in a small area with a number of individuals, stress will build up with the deer. Studies have also shown that high concentrations of fecal matter in an area of captivity with limited space and large number of deer will show more all different behavioural patterns than their wild counterparts. The deer would spend less time resting and would stand longer due to human presence, as well as displaying social aggression and competition with food more. Therefore, it's usually you want to keep them in areas that are big and open spaces where there's not much, trimming them. The Pere David has actually been isolated from the wild for about 1200 years, causing humans to be the primary perceived threat due to a long-term lack of exposure to other natural predators. So when encountering humans, often different responses depending on the sex. Female-only groups will display a lower level of caution towards humans than a male-only group. It's also hypothesized that the single type of threat may be sufficient to maintain anti-predator responses in the face of relaxed predation predator, but during the rutting season they do have increased vigilance and threat perception, likely in response to mating activity of the males. But historically, the main predators of the species have been leopards and tigers. However, they're no longer in captivity, they don't have to deal with them. So with experimental exposure to images and stimuli regarding those of big cats, they instantly react with a cautious predator-prey response, typical of wild deer. So being in captivity that long hasn't hurt them so much. But yeah, these are species that are extinct in the wild but have been reintroduced. We'll go into a little bit of their story about that. So Neolithic times, they did range across much of China proper, and they've been found around the Yangtze River, the Yellow River, and Hunan and Shaanxi provinces. And according to official data, the population now exceeds about 1,000 individuals and is considered protected. So the extirpation from China, so in the late 19th century, the world's only herd belonged to Tongzhi, who was the emperor of China. The herd was maintained in the Nialan Royal Hunting Gardens near Peking, and one of the walls of the hunting garden was destroyed in a heavy flood, and most deers escaped, with some of them being killed and eaten by the starving peasants. Fewer than 30 of these Pere David's deer remained in the garden. Then in 1900, the gardens were occupied by troops of the German Empire, and all the remaining deer were shot and eaten by the soldiers, which means they went extinct in native China. A few of these deer had been legally obtained by the French and British museums and transported to various zoos for breeding. So after that expedition in the 1900s, the English nobleman Herbert Russell was instrumental in saving the species. He acquired a few remaining deer from European zoos and formed a breeding herd with the deer park at his home in the Walburn Albury in Bedfordshire. And threatened again by both World Wars, the species was actually survived largely due to the efforts of Bedford and his son Hastings. And the current world population, now found in zoos all over the world, stems from his herd. And only 3 founders from Berlin soon contributed to the current population of more than 5,000. But there has been some reintroductions. So reintroductions of the species began in 1985 with a herd of 20, and this was followed by a second herd of 18 deer in 1987. So there has been efforts to reintroduce them in the areas. Another reproduction was 1986. There's another one in 1993. In 2002, there were 30 deer taken from the Beijing Melu Park and then released as well into other places. And while the species was assessed by critically endangered in the wild, with the wild population estimated to be less than 5 minutes, they are officially considered extinct in the wild. Upon the status being updated to the class of species they are considered extinct in the wild. Even though there is wild populations, they're still controlled by humans. So they are, until these reintroduced populations seem to be viable for the long term, then they'll be considered critically endangered. But due to the small population, lack of genetic diversity, but in spite of the small population size, they do not appear to suffer genetic problems from this bottleneck, which is good, and the population has increased in recent years and possibly remains for free-ranging populations can be reintroduced in the near future. And with reintroducing their habitat, they could face many problems due to spending all that time in captivity. Relaxed selection or reproduction with no invasive population means they could be a little bit more not as wary as predators, or don't have behaviors to protect from parasites, like rooming, things like that. And this may be confused by predators, but luckily they seem to not respond to the barking of dogs, but tigers, they also are more cautious, so they seem to have those behaviors on lock. And they have been introduced to other places in the world, like New Zealand lacks its own terrestrial mammals, and they've been introduced, and they have actually been found to hybridize with red deer, even though they're a different genus. So that's quite interesting. And in terms of its legacy, they used to, live across that part of, China, and have, the around the inter-society they were kind of considered the kings and things like that. And this new animal gathered from the Kulud Mountains to seek the advance of the primary Lord of Heaven. And the Lord was astonished at sight of the creature that has the antlers of a deer, the hooves of an ox, the face of a horse, and the tail of a donkey. And it's unlike any four creatures, so it's either called the Mulu, because they're unlike any of those four creatures, so they're kind of their own thing. But I just love them because they're just like a really interesting animal. They just look like a Dr. Seuss animal. It's just really, really cool. How can you not love a Prairie David's deer? And a species coming back from extinction. Extinct in the wild. Not quite there yet, but definitely looking promising. So yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a big fan. Alright, so next up. Now that was done by Narwhal, who's remastered it yet again. Making sure we get some great mods in there. Next up, we've got the Diana Monkey. Done by Mega Kebab. Mega Kebab always making some bangers. So let's have a look at these guys. Here's the Mega Kebab. So, here we've got Diana Monkey, or Cetopithecus diana. So these guys are an old wood monkey that have found the high canopy forests of Sierra Leone, Liberia, and the western Côte d'Ivoire. And named after their white brow, you can see that there. Their white brow, which resembles the bow of the Roman goddess Diana. And this black-grey gone on has a white-throated crested rough beard and all that stuff. So there were two taxa formerly considered subspecies of this monkey, but they're now considered the full species, the rollaway monkey, which we covered a while ago, and the dryas monkey from the Congo. The species is found in West Africa from Sierra Leone to Côte d'Ivoire. Its typical habitat is primary forests, but does not thrive in secondary forests. It is considered endangered by the IUCN and the US State Fish and Wildlife, with the chief danger being habitat destruction, as they're now virtually confined to coastal areas, and hunting for bushmeat. So in terms of their description, they range from about 40 to 55 centimeters in length, with excluding the tail, with a uniform 3 to 4 diameter, and which is about 50 to 75 centimeters long. Adults will weigh about 4 to 7 kilograms. And you can see, as we mentioned before, it's generally black and dark grey, but has a white throat, crescent-shaped brow band, ruff and beard. And they gave it the name, as mentioned, like the goddess Diana, the Roman mythology. And the monkey's underarms also white, with a white stripe going down their thigh, and their lower back is chestnut coloured. So in terms of their biology, in healthy individuals may live up to about 20 years, and the species of monkey is active during the day and feeds at all levels of the canopy, actually quite rarely venturing down to the ground as fear of predators. And they typically will retreat to upper levels of the trees at night for protection. They do not make nests, as they just sleep on the branches. They feed mainly on fruits, blossoms, and leaves, as well as the occasional invertebrate and insect. And they are in turn hunted by and preyed upon by other animals, such as the common crowned hawk eagle, the African leopard, humans, and the common chimpanzee. So they're quite a noisy presence in the forest, so they make all sorts of sounds. Their marked coloration allows a wide variety of visuals communication, so they'll make special alarms, things like that, and use distinct calls to tell apart predators. And other forest residents will actually be able to discriminate and use them. So other species in their habitat, when these guys make a sound of a threat, they'll be like, "Oh, that's a leopard. No, that's not a leopard. That's an eagle," and can tell them apart, and then use that to accurately hide. So they're kind of the warning system of the forest, which is quite cool. Indiana monkeys will communicate by both local groups and distant competitors with different alarm sounds. But typically, groups will consist of a single male with a number of reproducing females and their infants. In good condition, females can breed every year, which is quite good. So every year they can have a baby. Let's see if we can spot one of the babies. We got one of the babies there. There he is. So gestation for these guys lasts about 5 months, and then the young are nursed for a further 6. Not only is the single infant born, normally only a single infant is born, although the young are born typically in fairly well condition, They are open eyes and able to grasp their mother, but in zoo conditions at least. Their mothers are quite anxious and possessive, rarely letting infants leave them. But as infants grow, they become very playful, and juveniles will reach sexual maturity about 3 years. Daughters will remain in the group, so they'll never leave that group. But then, the males will leave their natural group once they reach sexual maturity and go off and do their own thing. In terms of human relevance, they can carry diseases that humans can, such as yellow fever and tuberculosis, and they are poached in West Africa, and they are sold as luxury meat and are considered a commodity. But yeah, a really, really cool monkey. Another great one by Mega Kebab, who's really given us some pretty awesome monkeys. How can you not love that? So next one we got is one from Great Cakes. How can you not love Great Cakes? Has made us another monkey, which is really, really cool. We have got the Blue Nile Pantas monkey. Another really cool one. Let's have a look at you. I think that's the female. That must be the female. Yep, that's the female. Well, look at the male. So the Blue Nile Pantas monkey, or Ethrocerbus polyphalus, or also called the Hilligans Pantas monkey. These guys are a species of old water monkey from Africa that live in the Blue Nile River valley of Ethiopia, Sudan, and South Sudan. And when first described in 1862, they were considered the same species as the common Pantas monkey, but now they are considered a distinct species. Can you shush, please? That's kind of annoying. Anyway, let's keep carrying on. So as you mentioned their taxonomy, they were considered the same. They're found in the White Nile. They were considered to be a subspecies of the common Pantas monkey, and now they're considered their own species. So all the subspecies now are considered their own species. In terms of their range, they are thought to be restricted to an area between the Nile and the western escarpment of the Great Rift Valley. They range on the vicinity of the Metameta south of Sud. However, it is only known from Ethiopia and Sudan. It could potentially occur in South Sudan. In prehistoric times, they may have actually found refugium in mountain areas of western Ethiopia, thought of which had survived aridification. You can see its kind of description there. It's a very interesting one. It has white hairs on its upper lip that kind of make the shape of a handlebar mustache. You can kind of see that there, like a handlebar mustache. And when combined with the lack of band on its eyes and ears, it's what distinguishes it from the rest of the genus of the other Pantas monkeys. So in terms of the species threats, little historical data and few museum voucher specimens exist in Ethiopia, as they were likely never common there. Even though there's no specific threat known, they are considered data deficient because they were only recently described as a species and we don't know exactly how they're doing. They are likely the villainization of them saw large amounts of people forcibly relocated into planned villages, and those were built in the restricted range of the species. Things like agricultural expansion and the illegal wildlife trade is another big reason for the declines. However, because their geographical range is so poorly known, we don't know exactly where they're found. That's part of the reason they are so endangered. They are not data deficient. Hopefully there is some protections for them though. So we don't know exactly how well they're doing. But yeah, really cool species. Nice to see some variety there. We'll have a look at a cute little baby. There's got to be a cute little baby. There's a cute little baby, I hope. Yeah, there's a juvenile. So you can see that cute little baby deer. How brilliant. Okay. So that was done by Great Cakes Mod. Another really great mod that they've made. So next up, we've got a bird this time. We have got the Western Barn Owl. Let's have a look at these guys. That's juvenile. We'll have a look at adult. Where is the adult? There you are. So this is the Western Barn Owl. And look how awesome that's come out. Great custom animations. Another one done by Great Cakes Mod. Really killing it. So the Western Barn Owl is kind of sometimes considered a subspecies in the group of just barn owl, along with the American barn owl and the Eastern barn owl, and sometimes the Andaman barn owl to make up the barn owl. But partly because some taxonomies do make this their own species, the Western barn owl, because there's so much variation within this species or species group, Great Cakes decided to make the Western barn owl, and he's going to make other barn owls to kind of represent that diversity. So this is the Western barn owl, so this is the one. It was formally described in 1769 by Austrian naturalist Giovanni Antonio Scolopi under the name Strix albia, but now they're called Taito, which is owl. So there's 10 subspecies recognized for different populations, found across Africa and Europe. So that's their range. They can be found on Madagascar and all the islands around there. Pretty much Europe and Africa they are found. In continental Europe, they do travel great distances, between 1,500 kilometers, but they have been known to travel 1,500 kilometers with ringed birds from the Netherlands ending up in Spain and Ukraine. But movements in Africa can be about 1,000 kilometers, with some from Sierra Leone ending up with South Africa. So they can move quite a wide range. Like most owl species, they are nocturnal and they rely on an acute sense of smell. Let's actually lower that down so they can use it. I want to see if they can use that. Oh, we're going to have a look at you there, so you're going to use that. So that's part of the new custom enrichment. Anyway, they are nocturnal, so they are able to see or use acute senses like hearing in the dark. They're often sometimes actually shortly before dawn or before dusk, because sometimes they've been seen during the day once they're relocating. In Britain, they're sometimes hunted hunts in day, and this practice may depend on whether the owl is mobbed by other birds, if it emerges in daylight. However, they can be mobbed by birds like rooks and gulls and magpies and things like that. They're not particularly territorial, but they do have a home range that they forage in. That can be about 300 hectares for males in Scotland. Obviously, that would depend a lot on the season, roosting sites as well, and also depending on where you live. Common roosting sites as well are things like trees, fishing cliffs, chimneys, and hay sheds. That's where they like to often hang out, where they're often called barn owls, because they like to hang out in your barn. Good place for them. They're a bird of the open country, and they like farmland or grassland, with some intersect woodland, and they usually be found as high as 3,000 meters, but typically more about 2,000 meters above sea level in the tropics. This owl prefers to hunt on the edges of woods and rough grasses or strips of adjoining pastures. They have an effortless wavering flight that quarters the ground, and it actually makes it very sensitive. Its asymmetrical feathers also help with dispersing sound. So this kind of the leading edges of their fly feathers are serrated. It helps break up the flow of air, which means they basically fly with no sound. And what's very interesting that the behavior and ecological preferences of different subspecies, even among neighboring subspecies, is pretty interesting. Which evolved in refugia during the Ice Age, potentially. So even subspecies that live in the same range or are closely related to each other have different habitat and behaviors. So they're a very plastic animal, which is quite interesting. In terms of their diet of feeding, there's a lot to be studied. They have been a lot studied because they do make, which is really cool, they do make pellets, so you're able to easily study what they've been eating. So studies to their diet have been made through most of their range, but in areas, most parts of the bird range, in moist areas over 90%, their prey tends to be small mammals, but a portion is lower in hot, dry, and productive areas. They'll feed on anything. Most prey is terrestrial, but bats and birds are also taken, as well as insects, lizards, and amphibians. And even when plentiful or other prey is scarce, earthworms do not seem to be consumed, so they will not eat earthworms. In most of Europe, they will eat shrews and voles. On other islands, they'll eat a lot of birds as well, especially if there's an island with not much birds, things like godwits and plovers and weavers and things like that. Small prey is usually torn into chunks, and larger prey tends to be things like rabbits and large rats and things like that. They will kind of just usually be dismembered and taken apart. On bird-rich islands, though, they may indulge in a lot of their diet being, birds, and other places they'll eat, pretty much anything. Mostly small reptiles, but they'll eat invertebrates, things like that. On places like the bird-rich like that, they'll eat often other places, grasslands, they'll feed a lot on insects more, but mostly they'll eat shrews, depending on the islands they are on. And even New Zealand, not the subspecies, but they have been slowly coming to New Zealand, and we've kind of practically terraformed it for them because we introduced all these small mammals for them to eat. One thing that's cool as well is that they have quite acute hearing, so their ears are actually placed asymmetrically, which actually improves their ability to detect the distance and position of sounds. They're able to pretty much use sound to better hunt, and the facial disc actually helps with this process, so it can help locate better where the sound is. So hunting, nocturnally or crepuscularly, they can target and dive onto their prey with their large talons. And considering the other owl species, they do have a high metabolic rate, which means they need more food. And for weight, barn owls consume more rodents than any other creature, and this actually makes them one of the most economically valuable animals for agriculture, with farmers often finding these owls more effective than poisoning to keep down the rodent pests. So they often will try to encourage populations of owls by providing nesting sites. So in breeding, we'll talk about their breeding. Have a look at their little babies. Let's have a look at their little babies. Little babies. These are quite fluffy, still got their down coat. How cute are they? So barn owls living in tropical regions can breed any time of the year. Some seasonality is still evident. So when there's a wet and dry season in their range, egg laying will typically take place during the dry season, when increased rodent prey becomes available to the birds and die off. But in arid regions it may be irregular depending on what the chances, though in more temperate climates they tend to be quite distinct. In Europe, most nesting takes place between May and June, with temperatures increasing, though this varies a lot during location, things like that as well. So female barn owls are ready to breed at about 10 to 11 months of age, although males sometimes wait until the following year, with them being used monogamous, so they'll stay together for life. And during the non-breeding season they may roost separately, but in the breeding season they will find a nest site and kind of find a place where they like to roost. Can be anywhere from buildings into, other things like that. Trees already mentioned where they like. Once they're formed, the male will make short flights and dusks to establish a home range, and then is where he's joined by the female, and they hang out together and feed and preen each other. And they do choose holes in trees. They will steal the nests of things like hammocks and things like that, and other birds and things like that. And before laying, she'll spend most of her time near the nest and essentially provisioned by the male. So then she'll lay her eggs. The eggs are laid on alternate days, and the clutch size can be 5 on average, but ranges from 2 to 9. The eggs are chalky white, sometimes like the size of a Bartram's egg, and so first to be laid. In the years of plentiful food supply, these little babies can have a survival rate of 30-75%, and the incubation period usually about 30 days, when the males will continue to copulate her while she brings food until which makes the newly habited chicks vulnerable to injury. So in terms of their babies, they will cover in a down coat of feathers. They'll be greyish-white down. They develop rapidly, and they will communicate with chittering and things like that and snoring. And by 2 weeks, they're already half the weight of an adult, and the amount of down is insufficient to cover their bodies. Then the quills will start coming, and then by at least 6 weeks, they are fledged and as big as the adults. But they still develop until about 13 weeks as they receive training from their parents to catch prey, and then they're kind of off to do their thing. And they don't have a lot of predators. So they do have a lot of predators though. Things like the Eurasian eagle owl is another thing that hunt them. Other types of owls as well. The common buzzards and goshawks and tawny owls have been reported as predators of them. But other than that, they do not have huge amounts of predators. But when they are disturbed, it will lower its head and sway from side to side, and it will make a snapping noise with its beak and create a defensive posture to be like, hey, get away from me. In terms of its lifespan, unusually for a medium-sized carnivore, they exhibit selection, so they produce a large number of offspring with a high growth rate, with many of them not making it to old adulthood. And while wild barn owls are short-lived, the actual longevity of the species is much higher. So captive individuals can reach about 20 years or more, but occasionally a wild bird reaches advanced age. A Dutch owl was actually noted to reach 17 years. Another captive barn owl was thought to be 25 years. But taking out these extremely long individuals, the average lifespan for an owl is about 4 years, with 2/3 or 3/4 of adults surviving 1 year to the next. However, the mortality is not even distributed, so there's only like 1 young and 3 manage to live to their first breeding attempt. So they kind of, they're in between. They're not quite as bad as sea turtles, but they do make a lot of babies and don't really mind what happens to them as long as 1 or 2 survive. The most significant cause for death is starvation, particularly over autumn and winter periods, where they affecting their hunting skills. Some things could be collision with roads. Some birds of poor condition are less able to avoid them, and historically many deaths were due to pesticides, as it would accumulate from the animals they were eating into them. Also collisions with power lines and shooting accounts is another reason why they can be considered quite endangered. Let's have a look at this guy again. How pretty are you? So in terms of their status, they are relatively common across most of their range, but they are considered not considered globally threatened. However, there have been large declines due to organochlorine, or DDT as it's called, poisoning in the mid-20th century, and rodenticides in the late 20th century. That has affected some populations because they eat mostly rats, and they are poisoned by them, and then kind of accumulates in them and makes their shells quite thick. It's the same, quite thin. It's pretty much the same thing that's kind of happened to things like owls and eagles and things like that. So luckily that's mostly been helped. While barn owls are prolific breeders and actually recover from short-term population decreases, they're not uncommon in some areas they used to be. So in 1995 to 1997, they suggest that the British population is between 3,000 to 5,000 breeding pairs, out of average of 150,000 pairs in the whole of Europe. And in some areas there may be insufficient nesting spots that may limit their population, so they're trying to put out nest boxes. And there's one population of the canary barn owl that's particularly at risk. So there was hunted by fearful locals and there was only a couple dozen left. But there's a somewhat larger population, even though this particular subspecies is rare. So this particular subspecies is a little bit rarer. And some of the birds in the Western Canary, which are usually cited on subspecies, declined much. And though they're all doing okay, some populations are doing okay. But in the United Kingdom, there is the barn owl nest box scheme, which is trying to increase. They put pretty much a webcam in a nest box and kind of watch. It's kind of like a little story. And there has been like that video of the barn owls like scared in the thunder. That was them, which is quite cool. But they've actually been lots of people are trying to replace barn owls for pesticides, so that's their defensive structure, defensive. But luckily, what's quite cool is that they've been trying to replace pesticides with barn owls, so trying to create habitats for them. That's quite cool. Yeah, let's carry on. Next up, we have got another Great Cakes mod. Another winner. So we've got Dinectus Felicia, Dictycinus or something like that. That's not what we wanted. Let's have a look at these guys. So Dinectus, these are a genus of Nimravid, or in the group Nimravidae. These are an extinct group of feliform mammals, also known as the false saber-tooths, in the family Nimravidae. So they are endemic or only found in North America during the late Eocene to early Miocene, so between 37 to 20 million years ago, and existed for about 16 million years. So the Nimravids are actually not that closely related to things like Smilodon at all. So there's multiple different groups of false saber-toothed cats. So these guys are kind of the furthest one apart. So the Nimravids they're more closely related to hyenas really than they are to cats. So they're kind of their own group that were very cat-like due to convergence and evolved these saber teeth, which is quite interesting. So the species was named by American paleontologist Joseph Leidy in 1854, and the type species is Dinectus Felicia, and was assigned to Nimravidae by Cope, and it is actually found to just be this one species. So they have a slender body that's just over a meter long, about 3 feet, and short legs about 0.6 meters, 2 feet high, and they have only incompletely retractable claws, powerful jaws, and a long tail. They are very similar to their close relative Homocephalus, Homophaneus. And the shape of the skull is actually kind of reminiscent of a feline skull rather than the extremely short skull of the Macrodonts, which is Smilodon and his relatives. And compared to the most recent Macrodonts, they're actually relatively small, but the teeth still protruded from the mouth, and below the tips of the canines you can see the lower jaw is kind of spread on the form of a lobe. So this is a species that walked plantigrade, so unlike cats they walk digitigrade, so they walk around on their digits. These guys walk around on their heels as well, just like us. So you can see they actually walk around on their heels, you can see that there, which is quite cool. And it was also probably not particular about its food as it is in Descendants. So the reduction of its teeth was still in its early stages, and they had not forgotten how to chew, technically. And its own environment would have been quite a powerful predator. Pretty much the equivalent of a leopard. So this species, I've mentioned Nimravids and what they are, but this species would have lived in the plains of North America, and fossils have been found from Saskatchewan, Canada, to Colorado, Montana, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Oregon in the United States. And Dinectus would have actually evolved from an early ancestor like Macardus, which is another really early one, that lived during the Paleogene. So this is kind of the first attempts of mammals to become big carnivores. But they are, as I mentioned, they are a feliform. So these guys are a member of the feliform family, which is quite interesting. And they're actually more closely related to, yeah, they're kind of on the other side there. Their ravid's quite basal, so they're actually more closely related to African palm civets than they are to a lot of and vipers, things like that, than they are to our true cats. So they're kind of their own group, which is quite interesting. And Barbafelids are sister to the cats. So that's the taxonomy there. But yeah, really, really cool. We'll have a look at the cute little babies, and then we'll carry on to our last animal. So let's have a look at the cute little babies. Another great one. I know these extinct animals often don't have much to say about them because we don't know much about them. But it's nice to see Great Cake's reconstructions. She always does a wonderful job with them. She makes them actually feel like real animals and not like shrink-wrapped or weird animals, especially like the Euanthitherium and the Abcamelus that she did. So I'm quite happy with how they reconstruct all these wonderful, extinct animals. I'm very happy with that. But yeah, quite cool. So last but certainly not least, we've got Lorby, who has given us a ribbon seal. So let's have a look at these wonderful ribbon seals. So let's have a look there. Look at how cute they are. So the ribbon seal, or Estrophonca fantastica, these guys are a medium-sized pinniped from the true seal family. So they're a seasonally icebound species. They're typically found in the Arctic and subantarctic region of the North Pacific Ocean, notably around the Bering Sea and the Sea of Okhotsk. And the way you can kind of tell them from other seals is where they gain the ribbon seal. They have striking black colorations with the 2 white stripes and circles, along with a dark brown or black fur. And they're only species in their genus. There is a possible species from the Miocene of Moldova. So adult seals, you can recognize them from their black skin, which carries 4 white markings, which is a strip along the neck, another around the chest, and one on each body side, and then one around the tail there, which covers the front fins. This contrast is particularly strong with the females, while the females are different in colour, with being bright and dark brown, less conspicuous. So males, you see, they're like these bright, this dark black. The females are a little bit more brownish. Newborn seals actually have that white natal fur, as you can see babies there. But after molting, they changes to blue-greys, and their backs are silvery beneath. And then after the course of 3 years, their pout becomes darker, and they become these adult colours in about 4 years. They have a short snout with broad, deep internal nares and large orbits as well. And like other species, they do have a large auditory bulb and lactosagittal crest. And also curved, widely spaced dentition and smaller canines of other species. And what's really cool about the ribbon seal is they do have an inflatable air sac that is connected to the trachea and extends to the right side of the ribs. It is larger than in males and in females, and is believed to be to produce underwater vocalizations to attract mates. And unlike other pinnipeds, they do lack the lobes that divide the lungs into smaller compartments. And they're not huge for a seal, they're medium sized, so they grow to a length of 1.6 meters, or just over 5 feet, and can weigh about 95 kilograms, or about 200 pounds, with males typically being larger than females. And there is some sexual dimorphism, so male seals are typically larger than the females, and this is particularly recognizable in skull morphology, as the males' noses are much more open than the females, and larger males are thought to have better chance of reproducing with females and have a higher fitness level. So we'll have a look at the females now. Look at this girl, how cute is she? So in terms of their habitat, the ribbon seal lives in the Arctic parts of the Pacific Ocean. During winter, it hauls itself onto pack ice to breed and molt and give birth. And during this time, it is on the ice front. During the winter and spring, though, they live in the open water. The sun moves south as ice recedes to warmer temperatures. Little is known about this habits during the time because you can't really see them. But they have been seen in quite far areas. They've been seen in British Columbia, Washington, and even south of the Morro Bay in California, which is quite interesting. In terms of their behaviour, they really are seen out on the ice and snow. Their method of movement on ice is actually quite highly specialised. They quickly will undulate their body in a serpentine motion, then grip on the ice with their claws, using altered flippers strokes to pull themselves on the ice surface. They seem to have this form of locomotion is relatively inefficient on other surfaces, most likely due to the increased friction between the animal's fur and the substrate. And while out on the ice, they are notably indifferent to their surroundings. Humans on boats have been closely approached them and before disturbing them. Mothers are often seen leaving pups by themselves, and they suggest they would have little predation from land predators such as bears or humans relative to other seals. And when these seals are caught in nets, they're known to engage in feigning death behaviour, so they pretend to die pretty much. In terms of their diet, they do have a very interesting diet. They consist almost exclusively of pelagic creatures or open water creatures. Let's see if we can find the other female. She's probably swimming around. There she is. Let's have a look. So they'll eat things like fish like pollux, eel poats and arctic cod, and cephalopods such as squid and octopus. They'll also eat young crustaceans as well. And they dive up to depths of about 200 meters and in search of food, and they are solitary, so they typically hang out by themselves. Ribbon seals located in the Bering Sea contain pollock, eel pout, and arctic cod, and they have relatively weak and smooth canines because their food does need to be torn. In terms of their reproduction, though, ribbon seals have a polygamous mating system, where males will mate with multiple females, and ribbon seals mate and give birth to pack ice rookeries, which sea ice which is not collected to land, so they're completely isolated. Males will then use vocalizations to defend these breeding territories or to attract mates, with males being sexually matured at least 3 to 6 years old, and females being sexually matured at 2 to 5 years old. Breeding then occurs annually and takes place until late May to June, corresponding with the loss of sea ice in spring. But then after mating, the embryo is actually not directly implanted. We'll have a look at the cute little babies while have a chance. Look at them, look at them go. He's so cute. The embryo is not directly implanted. It actually goes through delayed implantation for approximately 2 to 4 months. Deplanted implantation actually allows them to give birth when the sea ice extent is at its greatest. So pregnant females have a gestation for approximately 10 to 11 months, and they give birth to one pup. And females care for their pups for approximately 4 to 6 weeks. The milk female produces quite high in protein and lipids, allowing the pup to grow quite quickly. And while lactating, a female ribbon seal will not forage for food, so she must rely on her fat stores. And after weaning the pup, the female will teach the pup how to dive to forage for prey. Seal pups are born with a light largo or fur coat that is shed a month after being born, and these pups don't enter the water until their langur is permanently gone due to the lack of blubber and it being, not waterproof. And they will remain undeveloped until shedding. So basically, they will just stay on land until they lose that coat. It's almost like the down coat of birds, pretty much. It's the seal equivalent. And young ribbons were overhunted because of their soft and dense fur coats, and that's caused the population to decline. And we'll get into their protections. So young ribbon seals look like young harp seals, and like these, they were hunted for food, for their fur, And since they do not form herds, they are more difficult to catch than harp seals. But since the Soviet Union limited their hunting in ribbon seals in 1969, their population has recovered, with the current population estimated to be about 250,000. In March 2008, the US government agreed to study the Alaskan ribbon seal population and is considered endangered, and they decided that sea ice is critical for their survival, and they will not be endangered by global warming, luckily, and decline the list of the species. So luckily, hopefully, that will help. Because even though, there's enough sea ice there, it will not be endangered by global warming, which is good. Instead, it's become a US National Fish and Marine Service species of concern, as things like climate change will obviously, less sea ice will mean less breeding habitat for these guys, so that's a bit of a worry. And then in summer 2009, they were reviewing the species, and the species is not warranted, so they are considered, I think, now least concern. But I mentioned, of course, because of the decline in sea ice of climate change, that is a big concern. But I think this is a great place to finish it. Lorby's done a great job. Where's the male? Oh, there he is. He's having a sleep there. Not having too much of a swim today, are you guys? But anyway, another great job. So even Porky did a great job. Waller, Mega Kebab, Great Cakes, and Lorby, you've all done a really, really great job with this mod. Really, really brilliant. So these mods, brilliant. So I think this is a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.